Everything that rises must converge, by Flannery O'Connor. O'Connor's setting is her native South, at the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. "Oh, little boy!" Julian's mother called and took a few quick steps and caught up with them just beyond the lamppost. "Here's a bright new penny for you!" And she held out the coin, which shone bronze in the dim light. The huge woman turned and for a moment stood, her shoulders lifted and her face frozen with frustrated rage, and stared at Julian's mother. Then all at once she seemed to explode like a piece of machinery that had been given 1 ounce of pressure too much. Julian saw the black fist swing out with the red pocketbook. He shut his eyes and cringed as he heard the woman shout,
"He don't take nobody's pennies."
When he opened his eyes, the woman was disappearing down the street with the little boy staring wide-eyed over her shoulder. Julian's mother was sitting on the sidewalk.
"I told you not to do that,"
Julian said angrily.
"I told you not to do that."
He stood over her for a minute, gritting his teeth. Her legs were stretched out in front of her and her hat was on her lap. He squatted down and looked her in the face. It was totally expressionless.
"You got exactly what you deserved,"
he said.
"Now get up."
He picked up her pocketbook and put what had fallen out back in it. He picked the hat up off her lap. The penny caught his eye on the sidewalk and he picked that up and let it drop before her eyes into the purse. Then he stood up and leaned over her and held his hands out to pull her up. She remained immobile. He sighed. Rising above them on either side were black apartment buildings, marked with irregular rectangles of light. At the end of the block, a man came out of a door and walked off in the opposite direction.
"All right,"
he said.
"Suppose somebody happens by and wants to know why you're sitting on the sidewalk."
She took the hand and, breathing hard, pulled heavily up on it, and then stood for a moment, swaying slightly as if the spots of light in the darkness were circling around her. Her eyes, shadowed and confused, finally settled on his face. He did not try to conceal his irritation.
"I hope this teaches you a lesson,"
he said. She leaned forward and her eyes raked his face. She seemed trying to determine his identity. Then, as if she found nothing familiar about him, she started off with a headlong movement in the wrong direction.
"Aren't you going to the Y?"
he asked. "Home," she muttered.
"Well, are we walking?"
For answer, she kept going. Julian followed along, his hands behind him. He saw no reason to let the lesson she had had go without backing it up with an explanation of its meaning. She might as well be made to understand what had happened to her.
"Don't think that was just an uppity Negro woman,"
he said.
"That was the whole colored race which will no longer take your condescending pennies. That was your black double. She can wear the same hat as you, and to be sure,"
he added gratuitously, because he thought it was funny,
"it looked better on her than it did on you. What all this means,"
he said,
"is that the old world is gone. The old manners are obsolete, and your graciousness is not worth a damn."
He thought bitterly of the house that had been lost for him.
"You aren't who you think you are,"
he said. She continued to plow ahead, paying no attention to him. Her hair had come undone on one side. She dropped her pocketbook and took no notice. He stooped and picked it up and handed it to her, but she did not take it.
"You needn't act as if the world had come to an end,"
he said.
"because it hasn't. From now on, you've got to live in a new world and face a few realities for a change. Buck up,"
he said.
"It won't kill you."
She was breathing fast.
"Let's wait on the bus,"
he said. "Home," she said thickly.
"I hate to see you behave like this,"
he said.
"Just like a child. I should be able to expect more of you."
He decided to stop where he was and make her stop and wait for a bus.
"I'm not going any farther,"
he said, stopping.
"We're going on the bus."
She continued to go on as if she had not heard him. He took a few steps and caught her arm and stopped her. He looked into her face and caught his breath. He was looking into a face he had never seen before. "Tell Grandpa to come get me," she said. He stared, stricken. "Tell Caroline to come get me," she said. Stunned, he let her go and she lurched forward again, walking as if one leg were shorter than the other. A tide of darkness seemed to be sweeping her from him.
"Mother!"
he cried.
"Darling! Sweetheart! Wait!"
Crumpling, she fell to the pavement. He dashed forward and fell at her side, crying,
"Mama! Mama!"
He turned her over. Her face was fiercely distorted. One eye, large and staring, moved slightly to the left as if it had become unmoored. The other remained fixed on him, raked his face again, found nothing, and closed.
Wait here! Wait here!
He cried and jumped up and began to run for help toward a cluster of lights he saw in the distance ahead of him.
Help! Help!
He shouted, but his voice was thin, scarcely a thread of sound. The lights drifted farther away the faster he ran, and his feet moved numbly as if they carried him nowhere. The tide of darkness seemed to sweep him back to her, postponing from moment to moment his entry into the world of guilt and sorrow.